Pasha Paro. Thank you for tuning in. Today with me, I have Cam from Trash and Stash. How you doing today, Cam?
I'm great. Thanks. Appreciate you having me on.
Always the perfect day. I appreciate you joining us. And what I want to do right now today is we're going to be talking about, the title is Trash, Junk, Synonym. Okay? And I want to take us through a journey starting with the word itself. Trash, junk, right? It's things that people use every day, throw away, they take for granted. We want to shift the perspective to give a new meaning to this term trash, this term junk, because we want to shift it from that to the perspective from waste to opportunity, right? And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about some psychological transitions needed for sustainable waste management practices. Let's get started. First of all, give them a high-level overview of who you are and Trash and Stash, how you got started, stuff like that.
Yes, sir. Yeah, my name's Cameron. I own Trash and Stash Junk Removal. Started the company in April of 2021. I always tell people it was a COVID baby. I used to be in the event venue management world, so I used to manage stadiums and arenas. And it turns out that a global pandemic is not great for those of us who manage public assembly facilities and places where people gather. And so it afforded me an opportunity to make a career change. At the time, I was the director of guest services at the Whitewater Center, and was ready actually to leave the events world. Either way, I didn't think this was going to be the way I exited it, but when I got to that venue, assumed it was either going to be a place that I was going to be at for a really long time, or it would be the signal that transition was due. And so, situation being what it was, the transition became a reality. And really, at the time, it was an opportunity to reinvent myself. At 40 years old, you don't always get the chance to really start from scratch, and that's really what I felt like I was doing when we didn't know when public gathering facilities would reopen. And so, took stock of what my skill set was, where I could bring value. Became very frustrated with the idea of being widget, being a middle manager in a place where I had no people to manage, no systems to operate, no customers to serve. And how would I go out and bring value, support myself, support my family? And so I became really enthusiastic about the idea of like a sweaty startup. What could I go and do and earn with my hands? And so I was like, I can't go and become a plumbing apprentice. I can't go and become an electrician's apprentice. I don't have the time to start over in that way. But then was able to, look around and realize we had garages full of stuff and empty of cars. We had moving trucks in every street. We had storage units being built faster than houses. And so kind of decided that we collectively have a stuff problem, and that maybe that was not an opportunity for me to go out and earn, that I could go and help people solve those stuff problems. So I bought a truck and came up with the branding and the concept and the idea and started to build a team, and here we are.
So, a stuff problem. I like how you put that. This stuff winds up somewhere eventually, in most cases, right?
In every end up someplace, yeah.
And then oftentimes it winds up in a landfill, right? So with that being the case, there are problems associated with that. You want to talk about what could. Let's first talk about the transition from source, whether it's the residential or the commercial, the business, the manufacturing plant. What could go wrong between there and just getting it to the landfill, first of all?
Yeah, I think there's a couple levels to talk about there. The first is on the consumer side. And so I think that was part of the interest when I had become interested in this idea of junk removal, especially coming through COVID. It just felt like you're looking around and it's like, man, there's just this mass consumerism where we're being bombarded with really aggressive marketing campaigns where the algorithm knows what you're thinking before you think it. They're selling you something you don't really need, but now you're getting the dopamine hit of hitting and buying it. And that we're raising our kids in this world. And so just this material consumer driven cycle was frustrating. And then you add on top that most of the things we're buying we don't really need, but it's also intended and designed to be disposable. So even the things that do have use and are of value are really not there for long-term use. So I mean, when we haul off refrigerators, we haul off more new refrigerators and old refrigerators, um, because these new refrigerators just aren't, they're 4, 5, 6 years old, and that's about the amount of life you can get out of them versus the old ones that have been in a house for 30 years and are going to stay in the house for another 30 years. So I think the cycle starts with the consumer marketing, disposable world that we live in. And so I felt like just that element of waste, and I know that, sort of coming up with synonyms and vocabulary and is part of this talk. So like that idea of waste is just, you're buying things you don't really need, for reasons that are really not, they're embedded in human psyche, but it's not coming from a place of need, it's coming from a place of want. So that was the first part of it. And then, yes, it most certainly needs to go someplace once it's reached the end of its either functional life cycle or it's reached the end of its useful life cycle to the person who owns it. And so I'd always had this like, let's do the right thing with the stuff when we pick it up mentality. But it's pretty difficult to figure out what that meant and how to execute on it at the beginning. But I did know that when we got to the landfill and we would throw away these things that were really still useful or still carried some sort of value, it didn't feel good. It felt wrong. And then you start to think, what value am I bringing? It kind of goes back to why I started a company. Like, how do I bring value? And the truth is, we were helping our customers solve a problem by getting the things out of their house, but we were contributing to a larger problem in bringing these things to landfills or places that, it's a massive mountain of trash with endless lines of trucks coming in and out. And so we're not solving a core problem for the larger whole. And so we wanted to be a part of that solution.
That's a great point. The waste management arena makes it really convenient for modern lifestyle. You can consume stuff, whether it's big or small, organic or inorganic. And when you get done with it, like you said, the products now, everything from cars to refrigerators is being built only to last long enough for you to pay it off and then buy a new one. So now when you get to that point, the shortened life cycle is ended. It's made to be disposable. And then that's where these problems come into play. So you bring up a great point, because here's an article from the EPA. I wanted to speak on this. Now, this graphic shows the contaminant being like, equivalent of what a gas pump might look like with its oil tank underneath. But if we scroll down, there's some really good information in this article that I want you to just, speak on for a moment, because a lot of people don't realize the dangers present in what they consume and throw away every day. So here's a section, table 1, and feel free, I can put this link in the comments afterwards. People can visit this article. It says typical sources of potential groundwater contamination by land use category. And you see, normal things like auto repair shops, airports, dry cleaners, cemeteries, gas stations, golf courses. But down here, of course, there's hazardous waste landfills and there's municipal landfills. And on this whole list, you got everything from jewelry, paint shops, petroleum production. But if we go to the section on landfills here, it states that solid waste is disposed in thousands of municipal and industrial landfills throughout the country. Chemicals that should be kept or should be disposed of in hazardous waste landfills sometimes end up in municipal landfills. In addition, the disposal of many household waste is not regulated. So once in the landfill, chemicals can leachate into the groundwater by means of precipitation and surface runoff. So the new landfills are required to have these like synthetic layers, and it talks about that there, where the old ones don't, and that causes a problem. And then that leads me to this little graphic, table 2, which is a list of potential harmful components of common household products. And I mean, just talk about for a moment for us the things that, let's go residential first, the things that people have in their home, like this stuff, car wash detergents, car waxes and polishes. I mean, how many people are outside washing their car in their driveway and don't realize that they could be polluting not only the water for the whole community, right, but also the earth and the environment. So just speak for a moment about the things that people might have in their homes that they don't realize might require specialized services for removal, like you guys are trained in.
Yeah, I mean, and I can only speak for the landfills that we're in. So the ones in Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and York counties, and Union counties, and they're really great actually. Like the people who work there are super helpful. They're well kept. Like the way they manage the space and the way they manage the material is really impressive. And so there are requirements when we go there. We don't just throw things in the back of a trailer and dump it, and we do. And so we talk about our eco-friendly approach. We talk about diverting as much from the landfill as we can. The truth is, even though we're B Corp certified, even though we emphasize diverting from the landfill, in 2023, about 70% of what we put our hands on still ended up in the landfill. And for some context, the 30% that we had diverted was 250,000 pounds of material that we kept out of the landfill of the almost 900,000 pounds of material we picked up that year. And we're small, like we're 2 trucks. We serve about a 30-mile radius. We're a very small operation, but we still handled about 900,000 pounds of material diverted, 250,000 pounds from the landfill. So there's a lot of stuff. And you think about the big companies, the big franchise companies, the big people are coming in and out of there. There's hundreds of thousands of tons of waste ending up in those places. But I will say that they have the synthetic layering. They manage the piles, so they're constantly being turned, constantly being moved, being shuffled throughout. So the management techniques are good, and then they monitor you. So if you're coming with latex paints, that cannot and should not get dumped in the landfill. It's got to go to the paint counter. Tires need to go to a tire pile. C and D construction debris are your regular kind of household junk, and then MSW is like your kitchen waste, and so those are separated. Greenery, so tree branches, yard waste, it goes to its own spots. Metal is sorted and separated. Some places require you to dump refrigerators separate because they're handling the refrigerant in certain places. Not everybody does. Cardboard is separated. Rigid styrofoam is separated. So the process is getting better, but that is largely a human being process. So if you are going in on your own, or when we go in, we have to physically separate those items as we go through there. The other things that are a little bit fuzzier are the things you talked about, detergents, car washes, like the kind of household chemicals. There's techniques and tactics to throwing those away, but it's a little more complicated, and the answers aren't quite as cut and dry. I mean, I was moved here about 6 years ago from California, and in California you can't throw away batteries, like just your regular AA, AAA batteries. They have to be separated and thrown in their own pile. In other places, those just get thrown away as usual. So every place has their own process, and what happens downstream. So for those items that do get separated, generally the landfill is not their last stop. They get set in a transfer station, or they get put in a bin, and then they get shipped off to specialty handlers. So this exercise of recycling, this exercise of circular economy is a lot more complex than most of us give it credit for. Like you think, okay, well, I'm recycling it, I'm keeping it on landfill, I'm doing this, but now that stuff gets put on a truck or a container, and then that gets put on a ship, and then that gets shipped across the ocean to China for recycling. And okay, now maybe you've reduced your plastic uh, use because somehow, some way, you think it's getting recycled, but the carbon footprint or the greater greenhouse impact of moving that across the world is something to consider. So there is no great answer. The the cost of items to recycle versus the cost of creating something disposable is more, and so if the cost to do something to recycle something is more than just creating it again, then how much value? Like there's a larger both philosophical and um, efficiency question to be had there. So we think about that, we work through that, we do our best to make logical and consistent decisions in the way we handle and process things, and then aren't too married to any one answer, because we could learn things along the way that there's a better way to do things or a more appropriate way to do things, and so we're open to learning as we go.
Great. So we're looking at an image on the screen here where it shows the cycle of leachate, right? So the stuff goes into the dump site. Industrial waste goes into the dump site. Human and food waste goes into the dump site, the landfill. Agricultural waste, household waste. So all this waste goes in there. Rain comes down, particles, particulates get washed off into the soil, affect the microbiomes in the soil. The plants are affected by it because they pull their nutrients from the soil. The contaminants eventually goes down into the groundwater. So it seems like overall this landfill thing sounds like a good idea, but it's just not, because the inorganic materials cause pollutions. But then we got this other problem where the organic materials break down and cause methane, which then contributes to what they're saying is greenhouse gases. So we can't win for losing. Organic or inorganic is kind of like the landfill is just not a good thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think generally, if we can reduce what goes into a waste pile, then that's good or better for us, for our species, our planet as a whole. Um, the alternatives to that, like it's a consumption issue, um, and so how do you address the consumption? It's somebody had explained. So the circular economy is this idea that things can be reused. It's not the reduce, reuse, recycle triangle that we're used to seeing. It's that you engineer things from the beginning, consume things in a way that you can continue to use them in their most advanced form for as long as possible. So like if I use like a ladder. So we pick up like tools a lot. So a ladder is an item we pick up pretty regularly. It's aluminum. So we could recycle that. We can bring it to the scrapyard and it'll get recycled. And that's better than throwing it away, in theory. But what's better than recycling it is to find somebody else who will continue to use it as a ladder, because that takes no energy, no additional energy. It was created for longevity. That's sort of the way the circular economy is supposed to work. And so really the waste handling part of it is the last and should be kind of the smallest part. It is, you design these items for reuse or to be reassembled or whatever. You purchase them for as long as you can, and then the waste is the smallest part of it. And so that's I think maybe where you're going, is that if you change the front end part of it, the back end becomes a little bit easier to manage.
Absolutely. So with that being said, we understand the issues with the landfill. Then we know that it causes biodiversity concerns, right? So we're losing species, we're losing environment, all because of that. Plastic debris, animals, ingesting toxic materials, causing casualties. Everything's affected on the ecosystem, right? So consider, walk the people through this concept that have heard about it but don't know. Considering a single piece of plastic discarded, what's that journey like on a unabridged current state?
I mean, I don't know if I can speak beyond, the use of it. So, plastic water bottle or plastic bin or whatever it may be. It can be used for an extended period of time. At some point, it's that use is finite. So, you can only refill a water bottle so many times before the phthalates start to leach or before it loses its rigidity or it tastes bad or whatever reason you stop using it. Or a plastic tote can only sit in your garage so long before heat and stuff starts to get to it. It starts to crack and break down. um, there is the possibility of recycling it, um, which I'm not an industrial engineer, so I can't speak to kind of what the energy requirements are, the processes on the recycling part of it. But it will need to be collected. It will need to be shipped someplace. It will then need to be broken down and then put back in, to the cycle, and that can be done a handful of times. Um, at some point it's going to get to the end where it can't be used, but also we're producing so much plastic that just and it's relatively low cost to create. I think it's cost prohibitive in a lot of ways. um, we do a lot of work at, I shouldn't say work, we volunteer once a month or so over at the Innovation Barn in Charlotte, and they do a lot of really cool things. It's kind of a working lab. It shows you kind of what's possible in the circular economy, and they do a lot of work recycling plastic. And so they'll take like the snap packs that you get from that your beer, 4 packs your beer comes in. It's like that's an interesting thing because we all have gotten really trained at cutting the little 6 packs that soda packs come in. Like that was a really effective um, campaign to teach people how to cut those things up, don't throw them away, do whatever. And so they shipped it to these 4 pack hard pack things, which are great, but they take more plastic and they're harder to recycle. So at the Innovation Barn, they'll collect those, and then they have a process for shredding them, and then they basically melt them down into like 3D printing thread, so it can then be used for 3D printing, or they'll use that as raw material to do injection molding. So they've created bracelets out of recycled plastic beading, or they have like a Lego block that they've made out of these recycled plastic materials. So there's those sorts of things for innovative use. But that's sort of the extent of my knowledge on the plastic life cycle.
Nah, that's great because so far, as far as trash, junk, synonyms go, we've got, instead of calling it trash and junk, we can call it raw material. Puts emphasis on waste as a new input in the manufacturing processes around the world. Or maybe we, instead of calling it trash and junk, we refer to it or look at it as secondary resources, right? Highlights the material potential again to be reused in production. Or maybe we call it recoverable assets because there's economic value and potential there. You mentioned circular materials. We'll get to that in a moment, but that emphasizes, the circular economy thing that's coming up, growing and trending. Bioresources for organic waste can be converted to compost and energy. So there's a few synonyms there. And while we're speaking of bio, a lot of the benefit of us changing our mindset as a community, we talked about the drinking water, we talked about how that could be poisoning health, but we might as well extend it to overall health. When you talk to the human costs, there's health and community impacts. Consequences of poor waste management affect health and well-being for communities worldwide. There's more than just the bad odors that impact the quality of life. It can be increase the risk of infectious diseases for that locality, public health crises, and of course the people on the low end are always disproportionately affected by these type of situations. You want to look at how you want to explain to people, especially being a B Corp, how technically you guys are not in the healthcare, but this is a healthcare movement as well by keeping the environment clean.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there on what you talked about. So kind of we talked about a little bit, I'll start with B Corp. So we're proud to be the first and only B Corp certified junk removal company in the country. Second in the world, there's another junk removal service in Australia that has that same certification. But in order to get B Corp certified, it's basically an independent third-party entity called B Labs that evaluates businesses in 5 categories. One is your commitment to the environment. The other is your commitment to the community, how you treat your customers, how you treat your employees, and how you're structured. They call it governance, but how your organization is built. And so essentially you have to legally become a benefits corporation. That's what the B in B Corp stands for. A benefits corporation that states if we ever were to sell our business, whoever buys it is committed to the same standards that we've established. And so that's pretty difficult to do. There's a reason we're the only one, and it's because it's difficult. That's not to say other junk removal services don't do their best to recycle or resell, because I think as an industry, we're probably pretty good at it. And truthfully, we're financially motivated to do so. If you can donate something or recycle it for scrap income, that's a net positive versus paying to go dump it. So we're motivated financially to do that where you can. The difference is we track our numbers. We're accountable to it. We give 2% of our gross sales to charity. We've set up things for our employees to encourage long-term employment. So there's other parts to it, and so we're proud to be that. So just to get that out of the way, that's kind of what B Corp stands for. To get to the words that you talked about earlier, we talk a lot about the definition of junk. It's an important one because it's what we do, and I think that word is pretty common. It's an ugly word in some ways. I have a hard time calling somebody's stuff junk because I know that they're human beings, and I know that the stuff we're picking up did have value to them. And so that, it's a weird word. And so what we've done is we've adopted the idea that junk is a verb, not a noun. It's the act of casting something aside because it's no longer useful to that person. And the reason why we talk about it that way, so coming from my venue management background, I went to the Disney Institute a number of times, and Disney will tell you that the most commonly asked question in any of their parks is, what time is the 3 o'clock parade? And so you can sit there and you can say, well, that's stupid. Obviously it's at 3 o'clock. But that's not really what they're asking. People are asking, what time do I show up? Where do I stand? There's a million other questions that they're asking when they lead off with that, but that's just the only question that they could really articulate to open that conversation. And so for us, the what time is the 3 o'clock parade question is, hey, I don't know if you do this, but my stuff's not junk. And so I believe what they're telling me when they say that is, they have something that has value. It can be reused. It can be sold. It can be given to somebody who needs it. They just no longer need it. And so, if you only talk in terms of junk or trash or garbage or, whatever, then you sort of miss that element of it. And so we talk a lot about what does junk mean. Trash is in our name. I think, we probably came up with a name before we really thought about these sorts of questions, but I think trash denotes something that has no value. It's worthless now. I think the truth is trash has negative value, because by the time you call us, you're now calling someone to get rid of your trash, and so that's probably something to we're talking about, because a lot of the times when people call us, like they have a hard time justifying paying for a trash removal service. But the truth is that's not what they're paying. They have something that has negative value, and now they're paying for ease, for convenience, for safety, because physically sometimes getting rid of these things is very difficult. They're paying for responsible disposal so that they're not contributing to a larger problem. So that's really, when we think about trash, those are the things we think about. And then I think your question had more parts to it, and I got sidetracked. So what did I leave out?
Now, I think you did a good covering of it for the people. We're talking about the how it becomes a healthcare movement.
Oh, right. So yes, I think if you're going to talk about material in our water, pollutants in the air, all of that stuff is a huge part of this conversation, sort of at a larger level, and probably for people environmental scientists, or people who can really evaluate because it's risk mitigation. Like, what's the risk exposure to putting something in a landfill versus incinerating it? What's the consequence of driving or shipping something across the planet to dispose of it versus putting it in a landfill? So there's those conversations that directly relate to us, and I think in a lot of ways, from a societal standpoint, we've exchanged our health and well-beings for convenience, for expense, for corporate greed, for any one of those things. I think all of that exists and is certainly part of a conversation. I think at my level, we're interacting with human beings in their homes, and so there's a lot to talk about with regard to health. So health, the first is, that conversation of junk versus material. These are things that meant something to somebody. Like, it's a piece of furniture that they bought when they bought their house together, or when they raised their kids. It was inherited from them. So there's mental, emotional connectedness to the stuff that we buy. And so when we come in, we're task oriented. We're there to get rid of things, but we're part of the process. And so we hear people going through we're in people's homes when they're in transition. So they're downsizing, they're going through a divorce, they're having a new baby, their parents are moving to assisted living communities. And so just that emotional consequence of the things and the stuff that we handle is real. And so I think that's an element of health that's probably worth talking about. The other is, many of our customers are, over 50. And so moving through your house, sometimes just managing space to safely navigate, especially as people age and mobility becomes more of an issue. Getting the house so that it's safe to get people in and out. If you're having, if you're an aging senior and you've got skilled nurses coming into the house, or you've got caretakers, then having a space for people to work is an important one. And so I think that's part of the conversation. You and I have had this conversation before about, having more stuff in your house increases your utility bills. It creates, there's particles in the air, whether it's dust or allergens or mildew or those sorts of things. So all of that from a health perspective is related to the junk and the stuff that we have in our homes. And even for those of us who are really disciplined about managing the things we bring in, things still accumulate, life still happens. And so it's kind of an ongoing management to pay attention to. And when things have space and you've got closets with doors on them and shelves in your closet and sheds and garages, it's easy to put things away and not think about it until it becomes a problem. And so, um, you know, how do you switch the conversation from pain avoidance to pleasure seeking when it comes to managing the materials in your house? So, all of that is in and around the conversation of health and well-being as it relates to stuff.
Absolutely. Very, very well visualized in your sharing with us. I appreciate it. So we can change the nature from the words trash and junk to healthcare derivatives, right? Therapeutic materials, because sometimes there's a therapy in getting rid of it. Sometimes therapy is needed to get rid of it, right? So there's the mental wellness aspect of it. And then the community health, another synonym could be community health assets. So items that can be, benefit the public when properly managed, like not having a bunch of stuff littering the streets. So it's not just riding down the street and the trash bins are overflowing, or somebody missed the trash can and there's newspaper and cans everywhere. It's also, can the elderly neighbor move their recliner that they wanted up from upstairs to downstairs safely without injuring themselves? Let's shift to something a little bit more fun. All right. Let's go to this. You recognize this, Cam?
I actually don't see anything on my screen, but I'll
Oh,
take your word for it.
okay. What we have here is we have a Chevy Silverado. All right. It's like a 2019, 2021, something like that. For the truck guys, they probably could put it in the comments below for us. So we know that the littering and stuff, causes degradation of community spaces, decreases property value, and social cohesion. All that stuff is diminished, right, with quality of life overall. But I want to talk about, for a moment, a large part of what you stand for, which is landfill diversion. And the reason I have this here is because there's a number, and we're going to call this section garbage to gold, right? So instead of calling it trash and junk, we could label it as gold, because if you had one to pick, a Cadillac Escalade, a GMC Yukon, an Infiniti QX80, or what's on the screen here, a Chevy Silverado, which one would you pick? Put it in the comments below. And Kim, which one would you pick? Cadillac Escalade, GMC Yukon, Infiniti QX80, or 2021 Chevy Silverado 1500 double cab?
Generally, I'm a Ford guy, but I'll go Silverado.
All right. Now, the reason I bring that up is because there's a number, 7,300 pounds. Sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
What's that number from recently for you guys?
Was that a weekly diversion number for us?
That was a weekly diversion number. Talk to us about the weekly diversion number and the 50% goal.
Yeah, so this was partly B Corp. This was partly we wanted to know, but we track every week how much of what we pick up ends up in landfills versus what gets recycled, repurposed, or resold. And so, every Monday ish, we're posting what those diversion numbers look like. It's important because, it's important for a couple of reasons. One is you need the small goals to make sure that you're on path for the larger goals. And it helps us, sometimes the luck of the draw is what the luck of the draw, like the phone rings, you pick it up and the job is going to be what it's at. We think that because of the things that we talked about and emphasize, the clientele that we have, we get a larger percentage than maybe others of consumers who value the things that we value. But we do track. And so I'm trying to pull up that week here. So this past week, I think the number you're getting at, we had diverted 7,295 pounds from the landfill, which was almost 54% of what we had picked up. So that was a really good week because that meant over 50%, over half of what we touched was ended up someplace other than a landfill. So that's a win for us. In 2023, it was 30%. We had set a goal of 50% for 2024. We're not on track for that. Hopefully we should be above the 30% when we get to the end of the year totals. So we're making progress. We had talked when we have our annual planning meetings, what's sort of a big scary goal. And so we had talked about what does 100% landfill diversion look like? And most everybody would tell us that that's impossible, which is impossible in the way we currently operate. It may not be impossible in the future if we become a recycling only sort of outfit, and the types of jobs that we are most appropriate for handling are the jobs where materials can be diverted. I don't know if that's a reality, but that's 10 years down the road. That's something we've got on our board as continuing to look at and continuing to push that rate of diversion up. I think one of the things that's interesting when we talk about rate of diversion, everybody asks, how do you calculate that? And so it's a bit art, it's a bit science. Whenever you go to landfill, you get a tilt ticket or a tipping ticket, and so you know the weights. So you get on a scale when you pull in, you get a scale when you pull out. You know how much you weighed and how much you left there. So those numbers are pretty easy to track. And same way at recycling centers or scrap yards, it's determined by weight. So those numbers are easy. Where it gets more difficult is on the donation and recycling front. And so essentially what we've done is our drivers keep donation forms whenever we go and donate something. And so we categorize items by size, and we've taken an average weight. So an extra large item weighs this, a large item weighs this, medium item weighs this, and an average bag or box weighs this. And then we count them and multiply them by that weight, and that's how we get a total weight. So, not every couch is going to weigh 150 pounds. One might weigh 100, one might weigh 200, but we've got an average number there, and we're consistent with our process. And so that's how we get our weights, and that's how we track our rate of diversion. And so we have a baseline to be able to improve and develop from. So that's that. But that's what that diversion number is. We do monitor. We do post it. I think I'm a big believer in making things public. Part of B Corp is accountability and transparency. And so we're not going to just put a recycling logo on the side of our truck and say that that's what we do. We're going to let the share the data and have to explain those numbers. So if somebody says, "Hey, 30% doesn't sound like a lot," I think that is a bit subjective, and so we can at least tie some numbers to that, and then people can make their decisions from there. But we're continuing to grow that number as much as we can.
So growing that number is huge because we showed the Silverado, we gave some options there. The reason I did that was because 7,300 pounds is what those trucks within 100 pounds or so are said to weigh.
Mm-hmm.
SUV truck, whatever you want to call it. Now, what that equates to, if we look at aluminum soda cans, it's 32 cans in a pound.
Mm-hmm.
That means that, to put it in perspective for the mindsets of the people, 248,000 cans was diverted in a week. 248,000 cans. I have on the screen here an image from Reddit. I can't validate the accuracy, but the caption says each one of these bundles, each one of these cubes of aluminum weighs 700 to 1,000 pounds. So basically, when people are looking at this image, in 1 week, to put in perspective, now not all of it was aluminum, of course, but in 1 week, you guys were able to divert 7 to 10 of these massive bales of aluminum from entering the landfill in just 1 week.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Yeah, It's something we're proud of. I also think the other part about that that's humbling is to continue to remind ourselves and everybody else, like, we're a really small company. And yeah, so maybe, I think I'd like to think we're more thoughtful about it than some of our peers. Um, but like with some effort and some thoughtfulness, then a fair amount can be done at scale. And like, nothing we're doing is revolutionary. Like we haven't created new processes. We haven't really reinvented anything right now. Um, we do have some hopes for that. I think with scale, as we get bigger and we're able to increase our operational capacity, then some of this stuff processes can change, and some of it becomes a little bit easier because you've got the economy of scale at play. But I mean, it's humbling to realize how small we are, and these numbers are still very real numbers that carry consequence. And I think when people think about it and you put up a visual like that, it helps drive that home.
Yeah, I think it should help, and it's amazing because you cover the Rock Hill, Fort Mill, and Charlotte area exclusively. So these numbers aren't like we're talking maybe a 50-mile radius. So these numbers aren't like for a count for a state. So these are staggering. So that's the value that you guys are bringing. Let's look at um let's go into some of that circular economy that you were talking about earlier, rethinking the waste entirely. Speak on that, and maybe what you guys are looking for in the future as far as that goes to help the community with, because you also provide coaching, training for not only residentials and HOAs to get their neighborhoods up to a better efficiency standard, but also businesses large and small. So speak a little bit about the opportunities to collab with Trash and Stash and you for training in those areas and consultation.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in the space every day, and so I know a lot more now than I knew almost 4 years ago when I had gotten into this business. When I started the company, I'd never stepped foot in a landfill. Um, so the first time I'd ever been at a dump was dropping off my first load. So have learned quite a bit. Um, but I mean, I think, on one hand, as we talked about earlier, as it pertains to circular economy, it's, consumption, purchasing decisions that's going to drive a lot on what happens on the backside of it. So, sometimes that means you're buying something that's at a higher price point, but it's going to last significantly more, or it's engineered in a way that it's repairable or replaceable. Um, and so, that's part of, the consultation conversation. It's part of a purchasing department's conversation. Those things happen. We work with businesses. I think the other place where that comes in is, um, time is a resource, skill set is a resource, and so that a lot of businesses are limited at. So an example is we work with a shower door company, and they replace people's shower doors. And so they used to have their techs and installers pull the shower doors out, put them on the truck, drive them to the dump. And they've since realized that that may not be the most efficient thing for them because their skilled techs and installers should be installing shower doors, and so that's their highest value, and not driving to the dump. And so now what they do is they bring them back to their warehouse, and then we come out twice a month and haul them off for them. That creates efficiencies in their operation. It saves them wear and tear on their vehicles. Their techs and installers are a lot happier, and they're getting higher value for their employees on a cost per hour basis. So that's not really a circular economy conversation, but it is an efficiency conversation that we like to engage businesses in and with as they're having those. The other part of that is, there isn't a great way to recycle those shower doors. So we'll pull the metal off of them. But they're just there isn't a place for tempered glass that can really be put someplace. So every time we go, we dump thousands of pounds of shower doors. You feel like maybe there should be something better, but if somebody does have an answer out there, I'd love to hear it. We haven't found one yet, so um, those are the opportunities that we're looking for. Is what are the things and places and resources that exist in the world, so we can almost become a general contractor when we handle these materials and find places. We always tell people at donation centers, um, they're almost like golf clubs in a golf bag. So this center is going to take that center is going to take this. How do we find, if we come and we pick up all of these materials from somebody, then it's our job to figure out where to bring them that they're going to have the highest likelihood of being accepted by the donation center, and then also being put back into the world. Um, we get a lot of feedback on a place like Goodwill. We do go to Goodwill quite a bit. It has its place. Um, they take a lot of things. They're convenient. They're around. Um, they do put things out in the world. I understand the criticisms that people have of a place like Goodwill. I would say one of my criticisms is that even if you feel like you're doing the right thing and you bring materials to them, the number I've heard is that roughly 70% of what they accept does not ends up in a landfill or ends up being thrown out. So, finding alternatives to that where we can, take things to a ministry who we know they're going to get clothing at, or like mattresses are difficult. And so finding places that accept mattresses, that's sort of our consultation that can happen both at a residential level. And I should say consultation, I guess a service that, we play matchmaker on how to get it out there. But we do want to be able to be the people who can connect the dots. And if I go back to my world as a venue manager, that's primarily what I was a resource finder, and then brought in all these different services and coordinated them and made sure they all executed in the way that they're supposed to be. And I still carry that responsibility into this line of work. That once we take it in our possession, we'll do everything we're supposed to get it to the place that makes the most sense.
Speaking of that, man, it's a big logistics talent that you guys have there overall, and then to know what to do with it. I know when you spoke about the value of the technicians at the shower door place, coming from a place perspective where I used to run the maintenance department for planner scheduler position. The last thing I wanted my guys to be doing was driving a drive shaft or a gearbox, to be disposed of properly, right? When we could be doing other things to repair and have the machines up and running faster. So those services you offer, I think a lot of businesses need to really contact you and speak for that, because it'll help optimize their process, and then that means they can help more people too. So it looks like we discovered some more synonyms. We can call it market economies we talked about, but we can get into like earth resources. We can get into economic inputs, right? The revenue generators, industrial feedstock, resource capital, right? So their future resources, it's not just trash and junk. We talked about kind of sort of community assets. It's environmental investments. Let's call them opportunity materials instead. Or we can get simple and say value stream. And a large component of how this happens to translate from trash and junk to these other synonyms that we're finding is the recycle industry, right? It's an industry that generates substantial tax revenue, 4.97 billion in state and local taxes and 7.33 billion in federal taxes annually in some accounts. You spoke about the jobs that are supported and created by this. We're looking at over 159, almost 160,000 direct jobs, 300, almost 350,000 indirect jobs nationally. Talk about the importance of recycling and what value that gives, and your foresight and overview and recommendations on that for the community.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, mostly because I was just watching something the other day about how like recycling is kind of a waste, which is feels like a crazy thing to say from my perspective. But you know, they were talking about how we've got these curbside recycling boxes, and there's some people who are really good about it, and they read every label, and they understand, that maybe the lid can be recycled, but the jar can't, or you don't put your plastic bags in the recycling bin, or don't put a greasy pizza box. Like there's a lot of things that can contaminate a recycling load, and the problem is that, and every city, municipality, or curbside trash hauler has maybe a different set of requirements as to what is considered recyclable or what isn't. And so when that's not consistent and when people aren't well educated, then those truckloads become contaminated. And then when contamination levels are high enough, none of it gets recycled. And so I think it's a fair question to ask and understand the effectiveness of curbside recycling programs. And depending on how effective they are, to decide if that's an appropriate service for a given community. Because if the contamination levels are so high that none of it's getting recycled anyway, then you're kind of doing more harm than good, and households are paying for a service that they're not really getting, or whatever else. So that's a whole other conversation, but it got me thinking a lot about that, and the idea that if a recycled product costs more than a non-recycled product, then our systems aren't good enough to recover and recapture that material, because in theory it should cost less. You've already got the material, you're just reconfiguring it and putting it back out. So
Right.
I think there's a lot to think through and talk through there. For our purposes, I think we can justify positions a lot of ways, but I still come back to that first feeling we had when we threw away things that should not have been thrown away at a landfill, and it feels wasteful, it feels wrong, it feels bad. And so I think that's an appropriate read on these things. We just have to continue to innovate and find ways to do that stuff better. And when that's the opportunity, is you find those things and continue to improve in those areas, then that creates real jobs and real opportunities and real reduction in costs for people that ultimately benefit us as a whole. And the other thing that sticks with me when you talk about recycling, thinking back again to my venue management career, I was always really bothered with things that were done because of ceremony and not because of actual effectiveness. So the example I would use in the venue management world is like when you go to sporting events and you wait in line for security to check your bags, and then you go through a metal detector. And the whole idea is you're doing this to make you safer. All the while, first of all, you have somebody who's not really that well trained on searching your bag. And if they find something, so say they do find a gun, is that person going to be then skilled enough to have a conversation with that person on, what is supposed to happen to it, and then also what happens to that? But we do these things out of ceremony. The truth of the matter is, when you have people staged and stacked in front of the venue where cars can drive up, nobody around that is scrubbed, then that's your most vulnerable place in the whole venue. So you're standing out there in the most accessible place in a huge density of people. And so that's where the threat really exists. And so that thing that bothered me, because we had this whole ceremonial activity that didn't accomplish what it was intended to accomplish, and probably made things worse. And so I never wanted to do that when it came to our recycling or environmentally responsible approach. If we're going to do it, let's do it right. Otherwise, let's just say what it is and not do it. And so it's a constant exercise on, are we doing the right thing? Is this the most appropriate way to handle this? If so, how do we extend value to our customers, because they're hiring us for the purpose of doing something responsible with it? And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that directly answers your question with regard to the future of recycling or what it does for us as a community, but I find the concept of recycling interesting, and I think it's got a lot of opportunities for improvement. I just, as we're living and working and operating in the space, we're continuing to do what is best with the information that we have at the time, and excited about future opportunities as we learn more on our journey here.
I think you did a great job with that, and to me, you expressed indirectly some of the additional value of your B Corp status about doing the right thing. Because we know in that club scene, hey, look, you can be skilled if you want to or not, patting down, find the gun, or maybe we just tell you up front, and here's a few extra $100 for you because you're only making a few bucks, you know, to turn your head and let me go ahead in with my gun into the club. And that happens in the waste management situations as well. People are, pay to play is in not just music, it's everywhere, right? So I think you bring up a great point there. I appreciate you sharing that, because it shows the way you're taking ownership and responsibility for what's right and doing what's right as a B Corp. We got a few comments and a question. So in there, Michelle Ramos says her father worked with wastewater treatment in the city, and it was directly across from the old city landfill. So the facts and statistics surrounding these points are very important and intriguing. She also stated that was it the new documentary Buy Now, the shopping conspiracy, that was a mind-blowing insight into truths. She said she didn't know. We got a question here for you real quick from Cror Dereni. Excuse me, I probably pronounced the name incorrectly. I know my man's, and I always have trouble saying it. It's Krowker, because I know you can't see the screen. So let's just call him KD, right? What happens with items that cannot be recycled? You are the last stop for the waste.
Yeah, I mean, for us, if they can't be recycled, so we always tell people, donate, recycle, resell first. If we can't do that, then we will still take them to landfill or dump. Ultimately, that's what our customers are paying us to do, is to get the items out of their house. So we'll sort and separate as best we can. We don't have the capacity. I mean, I'd love to envision a sorting center where we've got a centralized receiving area, and we've got people who can sort and separate, and we can pull recoverable materials off of certain items, and we have like I'd love to have like a showroom where people can come and take furniture and be able to replace hardware, paint it, do all the fun stuff to repurpose items, in a shared space where people can learn from each other and have kind of a maker's spot. So I'd love to be able to do those sorts of things. We don't have the capacity to do that as we currently exist. So that's one of the things that we can get more efficient and more effective as we scale as a company. But the short answer to your question is, if we can't find a donation partner, if we can't recycle, we can't resell, we will still dump it. And that also, there's some of that we've talked about, how do we get better? And I talked about how, like, there's consumers, making different purchasing choices. The other part of it is preparation. So, like, we're a labor source, and we're selling speed, ease, and convenience. We want to make it easy and as stress-free as possible. For our consumers who really care and want to make sure that the most stuff gets diverted from landfill as possible from their load, then some of that means that they have to shoulder some of the burden in terms of preparing for our arrival. And so if you are able to separate materials out, when we load a truck, we can load a truck in a way to make sure that things go where they're at. When we do a job like a garage clean out and it's just, hey, everything in here needs to go, then we are far less effective in our sorting process because we just don't have the time to be able to go through every box and every bag and determine this goes here or this goes there. Um, that's separate from our value proposition, because that means you're setting guys there for hours on end, and as much as consumers may want to do the right thing, they probably don't want to pay an hourly fee for somebody to go through things in that way. We will work with professional organizers who do that, not necessarily from a recycling or repurposing standpoint, but to help homeowners sort of make decisions on what stays and what goes and how to work through the emotional process of that. But we've talked about, like, what if we do a kit? So we've toyed with the idea of having color-coded bags, and so maybe we give you a discount. You purchase this organization kit from us, and these bags help determine this is metal recycling, this is donatables, these are that, and when we show up, we're just matching colors. And so we've played with those ideas to get better and better at that sorting process, because it does become a value equation. Like, how much are you willing to spend, and how important is this sorting process to an individual? And there's a happy medium there. We love that the only right decision someone has to make is to call us. But the more prepared, more effective, more intentional you are about that landfill diversion goal, the more effective we can be in our job.
So the realness is that everything necessarily may not be able to be recycled. You're going for a record, let's not say it's a record, but you're going for an extremely high diversion rate of above 50%. So you're looking to keep half of everything that would have otherwise gone to the landfill out of the landfill. You have a vision for the future of a sorting facility, of a upcycle awareness program in-house, maybe with consignment options, maybe with just being able to sell directly to the neighborhoods, up and coming, the mothers who are starting over and can't go to Lazy Boy and buy the $9,000 furniture set. This is the opportunity where they could come to you guys. Also preventing where the donations and charitable sites fail at, the hearsay being 70% of their stuff winds up in the landfill anyway. Michelle Ramos says B Corp status is an honor to achieve, and she's working hard to get that recognition for her organization, Don't Raise Statistics. So a lot of people recognize the value of the B Corp status, see what you're doing in the community. And I think the premium that could be asked for the value given is light compared to the significance and the impact. And we should start to seek investment for you to help get that locality for the community where you can have the sorting facility and everything. And basically, me, we've talked, and I've done the video showing how, on the YNet7 channel, showing how businesses could be looking to grow themselves to scale to actually even replace the need for certain government agencies and corporations in their area. So, if the community really gets behind you, a great mind like you with a great focus, basically you could be the local EPA for the community. So they should be looking at coming to you now for training, business coaching, all kinds of stuff, and just get it together. And you're not limited on the coaching aspect to just that 50-mile radius we're talking about. You can have a satellite meeting, and it could be anywhere in the globe you could help. So there's several factors here that contribute to the persistence, right, of harmful waste disposal practices. I'm gonna give you I got four things here. I'm gonna give you a topic real quick and just give a brief response to what you would say to this type of individual or a person with this mindset, and then we'll wrap up. I appreciate your time. So, so the justification of behavior, right? The cognitive dissonance, individual often rationalize their actions. So someone might argue that recycling is inconvenient or that their contribution to waste is negligible compared to large systemic issues. So that justification allows them to continue harmful practices without feeling guilty. What's your feedback to them?
Yeah, well, I actually think it goes both ways. So, like with regard to recycling, we talked about contamination levels in bins. So, there's wish cycling where people put things in the bin with the blue top because they think they're doing the right thing and aren't really connected to the consequence of that. So, they've done the right thing because they put it in that bin, whether it gets to the final destination or not, or whether it's contributed to the solution or created a problem is irrelevant because in their mind they've made the right connection. So I think that's a mindset issue, that it's this one action is the only action you needed to take, and therefore you're disassociated from the consequence. So I think that's one side of it. Um, the other, on the I'm only one person, in the grand scheme of things, how much difference am I making? Um, I think that's a dangerous, thought too, because like what we talked about, we're a small company, and when you look at those numbers, like those are pretty significant numbers at the end of the year. And so if every one small person made little decisions, then I think those things equate to big difference. Prior to us becoming B Corp certified, um, and again, this is tied back to sort of living through starting a business, in the wake of the pandemic, is this, like we'd always heard the, think global, act local. And I think that's obviously true, but we really adopted the think local, act local. And like, the things and decisions we make, with our local community in mind will have the biggest impact on the people around us. And so I think that to me felt a lot more real. Like if I do something awesome for my neighbor, then that's going to make my life better. That's going to make his life better. And he in turn should do something awesome for his other neighbor. And like, we're kind of better off that way. And the big issues, the pandemic, the politics, the this, the that, like, it was, it it felt fuzzy at that point. Like I don't worry about that. It doesn't affect me. The thing right here on my street, in my neighborhood, in my community affects me a whole lot more. And so that's probably true in this stuff too, is just do the best you can as consistently as you can, and good things should happen.
I think that was a great response. You actually covered loosely the other three components I was going to add, which would be social norms and peer influence. People are heavily influenced by the behaviors of those around them. So if the community lacks strong recycling norms, the individual may feel less compelled. So we got to change the collective mindset. The lack of immediate consequences, which you mentioned, the delayed effects of the waste disposal can lead to a disconnect between their actions and consequences. And then there's emotional responses, the feeling of helplessness or being overwhelmed regarding environmental issues can lead to disengagement there as well, right? So connecting to the psychological deep dive, so to speak, helps us to understand what barriers we need to overcome in our communities to help this transition that we're in speed up. So as far as trash, junk, synonyms, let's do a recap and then we'll get into the closing. So we got, instead of calling it trash and junk, we can call it raw materials, secondary resource, recoverable assets, circular materials, bioresources. Then we can get health related. We can call it biofeedstock. We can call it healthcare derivatives, therapeutic materials, mental wellness resources, community health assets. Let's get into psychological reframing, right? Future resources, community assets, environmental investments, opportunity materials, value stream. We got two more categories here. Economic terms could be market commodities, economic inputs, revenue generators. It's not trash and junk. This is industrial feedstock. It's resource capital, right? These are the synonyms that we need to use in our community to help us wrap our minds around this. The last one is the environmental terms. So instead of trash and junk, they're earth resources, they're ecosystem materials, they're renewable inputs, they're climate solutions, environmental assets. Cam,
Yes, sir.
trash, junk synonyms. Anything that we didn't cover today that you want to make sure to make certain that the people are aware of and know?
No, I think you took us all over the place. That was a fun conversation. I will say too, I think it was Michelle. If you are going down that B Corp road, happy to answer any questions. There's a pretty good B Corp community in Charlotte that's developing. So happy to be a resource, for anybody who's interested in pursuing that a little bit further. And then you had talked about regulations. I think that's the exciting thing. The nice thing about B Corp is you get to choose your path on it. So everybody's got their own thing in their business or their life that they value, and so the B Corp process allows you to focus on those things and sort of champion the elements of it that are valuable. But I think as a corporate community, as a local community, the more we can do on our own because it's the right thing to do, because we found ourselves a community of like-minded people, or we serve a customer base who values the same things that you value, the better and the less reliant you are on government regulations or people to tell you what to do, because as you allow those conversations to be had, then the objective, they may have started well-intentioned, but by the time it gets to through the process, it no longer represents the initial intention. And so it's our responsibility to champion those things on our own, because we as individuals living in communities will do the right thing most often. At least that's what I believe. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to come on and talk about all this stuff.
It was amazing having you. I appreciate it because you know what we're about here, Ashaparo, building sustainable communities. And Trash and Stash is a great part of that. That's why I'm delighted to see your growth over the time that I've known you. And I look forward to the implementations of your vision being envisioned in the future. So, everybody, reach out to Trash and Stash Cam. He's on LinkedIn. You can go to trashandstash.com. Let me put a card up for you guys real quick. Give me one moment here. I should have had that one prep. Let's do this for the road, because you guys are essential, and we've discovered that if we didn't know prior to, it's really a building block of the future and a pillar of the community. So there's the contact information with the essential, with the pure glass of drinking water, and think about your kids in the background there. 803-720-2054 or Cam at trashandstash.com. Go ahead and connect Michelle. Cam's a great guy. I've known for a while. I've worked with him. I do the branding and marketing for him. And Michelle is actually has a unique activist role up in Ohio. So you guys should definitely connect and build there. I met her through Chris, which you might remember from the Good Ancestor program that we did a few days ago. So always a perfect day. Trash and stash. Any last words, Cam?
Nope, I'm good. I appreciate it.
Always a perfect day. I'm Pasha Paro. Thank you for tuning. Enjoy.